Had you loved yourself over your wife, over your children? I'm sure you loved your family.
Yeah,
because most people say, but look, I'm working hard for my family. I'm doing the best I can. I love them, but I've got to do this, and I've got to do this, and that's why I've got to be away from them, and that's why I've got to try to strive to become number one, because they're going to benefit. I mean, that's the argument a lot of people make.
Absolutely, and this it hurts me to say, but yeah, I loved myself a whole lot more than I loved them. But it was the rationale, as you said, was, hey, what's good for me is good for them ultimately, right?
Right.
So I neglected them and emotionally cheated on them. We don't want to go into that too far.
Well, so you saw this view, and up to what point did they take you? Up until your marriage, until your
Oh no, up
death?
to the present.
Uh-huh.
It was quite bleak, and I was so happy when it was over, because having been a teacher, I realized that I had, not only had I not passed the course, I had flunked the course.
You're not Catholic, but a lot of Catholics would look at that and say, well, that's kind of like the purgatory we're taught about.
Yeah.
So it would be sort of like a purgatory.
Yeah, and I heard a priest explain purgatory this way, which I think is really wonderful. He said, don't think of purgatory, this is a priest speaking, I'm quoting him, don't think of purgatory as a geographical place. Think of it as a state of being. And I certainly believe that we need to be purged or purified before we can go to heaven.
Even after our death, even though we've accepted Jesus. Even if you've accepted Jesus as your Savior.
Absolutely, because none of us are perfect enough, pure enough to go to heaven. I mean, Mother Teresa would be the first one to tell you that she needs more perfection, filled with the goodness of Christ, and let go of whatever those little things that she might have been holding on to, in her life. So I thank God for that purgation, or that purgatory, or whatever. But you don't want to think of it as like a country that we have to sort of make the journey through. Think of it as a process that's a wonderful grace of God that we're given, that we are made perfect by God so that we can go to heaven. And nobody is good enough to go to heaven without the love and the perfection of God interceding on our behalf.
So what happened next? So after you see this view of your life, then what?
Well, they said, do you have any questions? And I said, oh, I've got a million questions. And they said, well, ask whatever you want. And they were the most wonderful teachers, because they were trying to speak directly to my level of understanding, which was pathetically low in comparison to them. And I had, like no theological or religious background or understanding at that point, so I didn't even know what was good stuff to ask. But so I asked all kinds of questions, historical questions, biblical questions. And everything I asked, they answered. A lot of times they showed me things. There were times when it was like we were there. I would say, what would the future be like, and we'd be in the future. What was this like, and we'd be there. And it was very important experience, because people asked me, how long did this last? And I said, well, I learned a whole lot more than I ever learned in graduate school, which was 3 years. And this was a much more intense and thorough course. So I learned way more in this question and answer period, however long it took, which I don't know, than I'd learned going to the University of California, Berkeley.
Well, let's go through some of those questions. I don't know if we can tackle all of them, but let's go through some of them. What are some of the most important ones that you felt like you asked? I know you ask about, let's say, for example, you ask about Jesus in the Bible. You said, is that all that Jesus did?
Right. And they said that, it was funny, because this is in the Bible. I didn't know it at the time, but they said that if they'd written down all the things that Jesus did, it would fill all the books in the world. The world couldn't even hold all the books about what Jesus did when he was in this world. And Jesus is alive today. Jesus has been around from the beginning and is still around. And the reason why Christianity exists, and the only reason why it exists, is because millions of people have experienced his love, his presence, his power. They've experienced him in some way in their lives. And there are millions and millions of people, and there have been for over 2,000 years, that know that he is real, and that he is what God has sent to us so that we can have a proper relationship with God.
And they told you that what's contained that he did much more, but what's contained within the pages of the Bible is all that we need to know to do what we're supposed to do on earth to get to heaven, to be with him.
You know, those four little Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, seem so little, but when you try and preach them every Sunday, there's so much there that there's more than a lifetime's worth of learning and preaching and understanding. In what we know more than enough about Jesus to know that we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. You talked also about how we got here and when God began and when he began, or was he always there? Talk about that for us.
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting, I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're asking, but that the creation didn't happen once a long time ago, and like, you know, that old idea that the clockmaker made the clock and then wound it up and it's been sort of like ticking ever since.
Yeah.
That God has been doing the creation and is doing the creation, and that we are invited to be a part of this. We have this, one of the terms for God is the Creator, and it says we're made in the image and likeness of God, and we're invited to participate in the creation. And in this life, one of the ways that we do this, an obvious way, is to have children and to raise them. I mean, what more creative act could you possibly want, and what a more awesome responsibility than to have children and be responsible for their nurture and education and well-being.
And you wrote that he is a part of each and every one of us, and that he takes great joy in seeing each and every human being. But that seems so mind-boggling given the tremendous population on our earth, that he's actually able...
But the irony is that for God it's so easy. You know, for God, God's conscious... See, because we can only project our sense of consciousness onto God and anthropomorphize God, but God's consciousness permeates everything. And one of the terms I've used for this is the Holy Spirit, that Spirit of God, in the ways that God has revealed God's self to us, that Spirit is everywhere and through everything. You know, God is with the creation, and God is present to us. And we can either be aware of that and act accordingly, or we can be oblivious to it and deny that.
If you had not been sent back to earth, where might you have gone after you had left the angels and Jesus? What would you have gone to heaven at that point because you had been purged, or would you have had to go to another point where you'd have to learn something else before to reach a higher level, then another higher level?
I don't honestly know the answer, so I can only speculate, but I wasn't ready to go to heaven. I mean, they made it really clear to me that I was not a candidate at that point. I wasn't.
Were you shown where other people were going? I think you wrote about maybe somebody by a brook reading a famous novel of some sort.
Yeah, there are places where I could have gone and matured spiritually in God's whole creation, but I can't comprehend it all. It's way too beyond.